Get ready for a spine-chilling experience. If you love feeling your heart race and the suspense creeping into the room, you're in the right place. But before we begin, I have an invitation for you. If you truly have the courage to face the unknown, go ahead and hit that like button now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. Share this video with someone who also loves the thrill of fear, but be careful. The scariest things tend to happen when you least expect it. Are you ready to face what's coming next? Let's see if you can handle it. Hiroshi parked his car in the deserted parking lot at the entrance to the forest. He had read about Aokigahara and its tragedies, but believed that these stories were nothing more than exaggerated legends. With a camera around his neck and a backpack full of equipment, he took the first step into the forest. The air seemed to grow heavier with every meter traveled, and the sound of the wind disappeared completely. As he progressed, Hiroshi began to notice how the forest seemed to absorb the sounds of the outside world. The sensation was suffocating, as if he were being watched by invisible eyes. He tried to shake off the discomfort and took some photos, trying to capture the dark beauty of the place. However, he felt a shiver go up his spine when he saw a worn yellow ribbon hanging from a tree. She seemed to mark a forgotten path. He followed the tape trail, thinking it would be interesting to document the tracks people left so they wouldn't get lost. But the further he went, the more the feeling of being watched increased. Suddenly, he heard a whisper in the distance, something indistinct, as if someone was calling his name. He stopped, his heart racing, and looked around, but there was no one. Deciding to ignore the whispers, Hiroshi continued following the trail. The forest seemed to get denser, the trees taller and the sunlight almost non-existent. He felt like he was sinking into silent darkness, and the sound of his own footsteps on the leaf-covered ground seemed deafening. At one point, he noticed that the yellow ribbons he had been following disappeared. He stopped, confused, and looked around, trying to understand where he had gone wrong. The whisper returned, this time clearer and closer, echoing his name among the trees. Hiroshi! The voice was feminine and familiar, but he couldn't identify where it came from. A chill ran down his spine. He was alone, but he felt a presence beside him. Suddenly, an icy breeze blew past him, and something moved around him. Hiroshi raised the camera and quickly took a photo, trying to capture the source of the sound. When he looked at the image, he only saw distorted shadows among the trees, but there was something more. A pale face, hidden in the shadows, watched him, a presence that shouldn't be there. Hiroshi's heart hammered in his chest. He knew something was wrong, but curiosity compelled him to continue. He tried to head back the way he came, but the trail was gone. The trees looked different, as if they had changed position while he wasn't looking. Disoriented, he pulled out his GPS, only to discover that the device was unable to locate his position. "That's not possible," he muttered, breaking into a cold sweat. He looked at the photos on the camera, but the images seemed distorted, as if the forest itself had folded in on itself. Once again, he heard the female voice, louder this time, coming from his left. He ran towards the sound, hoping to find a way out, but found something much worse. Between the trees, he saw a rope hanging. It was a hanging rope, still dangling as if it had been used recently. He felt his stomach turn, but it was at that moment that he noticed something on the floor, an old diary partially buried in the leaves. He took it with shaking hands and opened it. The first few pages were blank, but the name on the cover was familiar, his own name, Hiroshi. Hiroshi leafed through the diary with ragged breaths, trying to find some explanation for that. The blank pages gave way to confusing texts, written by hand, as if someone had recorded their last moments. "I got lost. I can't find my way back," read the first page in faded ink. The words seemed written with desperation, each line more chaotic than the last. As he progressed through the pages, he recognized his own name being mentioned, describing events he had not yet experienced. I heard the whispers again. "She's here." The handwriting became more illegible and choppy as the words advanced. Hiroshi felt panic rising, as if the book was narrating his own destiny. Despair gripped him when he read the last sentence. "There is no way out. He slammed the diary shut, the sound echoing through the silent forest. The invisible presence around him seemed to intensify. The cold breeze that blew past him was like an icy touch on his skin. Suddenly, the trees around him seemed to close in, and he felt as if the forest were alive, moving to trap him there forever. While holding the diary, Hiroshi heard slow, light footsteps behind him. He turned, fear rising within him, and saw a woman standing among the trees. His skin was pale as the moon, and his eyes were sunken, devoid of any sparkle of life. She watched him with a sad, empty smile. Hiroshi stepped back, but the woman didn't move. She just stood there, silent, as if she had been waiting for him. "Who are you?" he asked, but the woman didn't respond. Instead, he pointed to the diary in his hands. With trembling fingers, Hiroshi opened the diary again, and new words had appeared on the last page. "Follow me, and I will show you the truth." The woman took a step back, disappearing into the darkness of the trees, and Hiroshi felt an inexplicable force compelling him to follow her. He knew he was making a mistake, but something inside him told him he had no choice. The woman appeared and disappeared between the trees, guiding him along a hidden path. The silence was so absolute that he could hear his own breathing. Each step took him deeper into the forest, to a destination he could not understand. After following the woman for several minutes, Hiroshi arrived at a hidden clearing where sunlight never seemed to reach. In the center of the clearing was an old, dilapidated wooden hut. The woman was standing at the entrance, still silent, watching him. He hesitated, but the force pushing him forward was irresistible. He knew he needed to go in. As he walked through the cabin door, the smell of rot and mold invaded his nostrils. The walls were covered in old photos, all blurred and distorted, as if they were warped memories. In the center of the room, a single candle was lit, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The woman was at his side now, closer than ever, her black eyes fixed on his. "Why am I here?" Hiroshi asked, feeling tears run down his face for no apparent reason. The woman finally spoke, her voice low and echoing. "Because you've always been here." He stepped back, confused, and looked again at the diary in his hands. The words on the last page had changed again. "The forest is a cycle, and you are part of it." Hiroshi fell to his knees, the diary slipping from his shaking hands. The revelation hit him like a cold blade. He wasn't just lost in the forest, he was part of it. The woman approached slowly, and for the first time he noticed the scars on her wrists, old marks of suffering and pain. "I am you," she said softly, and in that instant, he understood that the figure was not just a haunting, but a part of him, a shadow of what he would become. The cabin seemed to shake around him, the shadows on the walls moving frantically, reflecting Hiroshi's desperation. "No, this can't be real," he shouted, but the forest didn't respond. The woman just smiled, and his figure began to fade away, leaving him alone in the darkness of the cabin. He ran outside, desperate, but the clearing was no longer the same. The surrounding trees moved as if they had a life of their own, blocking his way back. The forest had captured him, and he knew he would never leave. The woman's last words echoed in his mind. "The forest is a cycle, and you are part of it." Days, weeks, maybe months passed, but time no longer had meaning for Hiroshi. He wandered the forest aimlessly, trapped in a maze of shadows and memories that didn't belong to him. Voices whispered incessantly around him, mocking his attempt to escape. His mind was broken, unable to distinguish reality from illusion. In a last act of desperation, he again found the hanging rope he had seen at the beginning of his journey. But this time I knew what I had to do. The forest demanded a price to free those who entered it, and he was ready to pay. With shaking hands, he tied the rope around his neck and, with tears in his eyes, stepped off the branch. The last sound he heard was the soft whisper of the woman beside him. "Now you belong to the forest, forever." Hiroshi's body was never found, as were those of many others before him. His car remained parked at the entrance to Aokigahara, a silent reminder of his disappearance. But the diary, which he had found in the forest, mysteriously appeared at the reception desk of a nearby hotel, with pages filled with events that had not yet happened. The diary now told stories of other people who would enter the forest, each following the same tragic fate. Old photos of unfamiliar faces began to appear on the pages, and everyone seemed familiar in some way. The final written words were clear. The forest always waits for more. Aokigahara, as always, remains in the shadow of Mount Fuji, silent and unchanging. She waits patiently for the next onlookers, those who will hear the whispers among the trees and follow the trail of ribbons that lead nowhere. Hiroshi's legend became one of the many stories told about Aokigahara, but those who knew the truth knew that the forest never forgets. It keeps its secrets with deep roots, wrapped in the souls of those who dared to enter and never left. And even today, it is said that if you walk the trails at nightfall, you can hear a soft voice call your name through the trees, inviting you deeper into the darkness. And if you are foolish enough to answer, you will see a pale figure watching you, with a sad, empty smile, patiently waiting to show you the truth. The forest never sleeps. She just waits for you. Months after Hiroshi's disappearance, the story spread among curious people in the region. A young man named Kenji, fascinated by the mystery of Aokigahara, decided to visit the forest. He had read about Hiroshi and the legends about the suicide forest, but believed it was all exaggerated superstition. "I don't believe in ghosts," he said to himself, as he packed his backpack. Kenji wasn't just curious, he wanted to prove that all those stories were baseless. As he entered the forest, he felt the oppressive silence that many had described, but he was unfazed. With his camera and notebook, Kenji began exploring. The forest was cold and silent, and the shadows between the trees seemed darker than usual. The feeling of being watched didn't take long to appear. Still, he continued forward, determined to prove that there was nothing to fear. At one point, as he walked, he found something partially buried in the ground. A dirty diary, its pages yellowed with age. The cover had dirt marks and a name written in blurred letters. Hiroshi. Kenji frowned, feeling a shiver run down his spine. Even so, he opened the diary, curious to know what was inside. The content seemed incomplete, but something caught his attention. The last few pages were blank, waiting to be filled in. Kenji put the diary in his backpack and continued walking. As he advanced, he noticed that the forest seemed to change around him, as if the trees were subtly moving to block his path. A feeling of déjà vu came over him. He had been there before, but he didn't remember how. Time seemed to not move, and the sky became darker and darker, even though it was only midday. He stopped in a clearing, trying to get his bearings, and took the diary out of his backpack. The notebook was different now. Words had appeared on the blank pages, recording every step Kenji had taken since entering the forest. He leafed through in disbelief until he came to a line he didn't remember reading before. "He will see his wife at dusk." A chill took over his body, and he looked around, feeling that something was wrong. The silence was overwhelming, and then, out of nowhere, an icy wind blew through the forest, almost extinguishing what little light was left. He heard the rustle of leaves behind him, as if someone was moving. The forest seemed to know his every move, as if it were watching and recording. With the diary in hand, Kenji started walking again, quickening his pace. But instead of feeling safe, the forest seemed to close in around him. He heard a soft, almost imperceptible voice calling his name in the distance. "Kenji." The voice was feminine, delicate, and echoed from a point between the trees. He hesitated, trying to resist the urge to follow the sound, but he felt as if something was pulling him in that direction. He slowly turned around and saw the figure of a woman in the distance. Her pale skin glowed faintly in the darkness of the forest, and her eyes were fixed on him. Kenji couldn't look away,